Hello, 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 and welcome back to another episode of Ask Miss Jai Live. I am Miss Jai, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you all about the current revisions that are in discussion for the FDA's blood ban on that targets gay and bisexual men specifically. So I'm really excited to talk in detail about that today. I am hoping that we have an opportunity to learn a little bit more around kind of where this blood ban has come from, especially for folks who might be less familiar with it or unsure how we even got to where we are right now, and why this is so monumental in the federal government recognizing the reality of our daily lives and also what it looks like for HIV prevention and care in blood donation. So I'm really excited to share a little bit about that. If you are catching this live, go ahead and put a hashtag live in the comments. You can ask questions in the comments as well. If I don't know the answer to something, I'll let you know that I don't know the answer, but I'll figure it out, or I'll find the answer, or I'll bring on a guest who can answer it. And if you are catching this on the replay, go ahead and put a hashtag replay. You can also put your questions. And I'd love to hear just what you found most interesting about today's conversation. So, like I said, my name is Miss Jai. I use feminine and masculine pronouns, so she, her, and he, him. This program is dedicated to educating around trans and non binary health and wellness for providers and also for us as trans and non binary people existing in the world. Today's conversation is going to be a little bit not deviating from that, but is going to be a little bit complementary to that because I think this speaks to the ways that assumptions are made about our bodies, assumptions are made about what risk looks like for HIV, and how those kind of play out in policy and the way that we see those things happen in our world. So, not specific to trans and non binary people, but I'll talk a little bit about. What those current policies look like for blood donation if you are trans or non-binary. So, to kind of kick us off, I wanted to go over a little bit where this rule kind of comes from, where this ban originally came from. So, for folks who are unfamiliar, the blood ban or the ban on gay and bisexual men, or MSM, men who have sex with men, donating blood comes out of the early AIDS crisis. So it comes out of the late 70s, early 80s, and specifically around in a time when blood donations were being used for, well, and they're still being used for this, but blood donations were being used to develop products for hemophiliacs, and were being created to develop products for folks who were needing clotting factor. So, what we see is that in the late 70s, early 80s, we have a lot of folks who are donating blood. We have organizations that have kind of like cropped up and are paying people for their blood and for their plasma, and that those products have HIV and hepatitis C in them, and we have those products being collected. We're learning more about HIV, but we really don't know a lot about it, or the information is coming really quickly. And then in the early 80s, we have organizations like Bayer who are creating this clotting factor that helps hemophiliacs whose blood doesn't clot when they get a cut or an internal break or any of those issues, creating this clotting factor so that they can receive medication in order to make sure that they scab and they don't continue to bleed out. And so, up until this point, predominantly gay men have been diagnosed with HIV. There's conversations around it being called GRID, or gay-related immunodeficiency. There's a lot of stigma associated with being HIV positive. And then we suddenly start seeing a lot of hemophiliacs contracting HIV who are not gay men, who are not bisexual men, who are not engaging with cisgender men. And it's because the products that they were receiving had the HIV in it already. Um, and so some of the pieces around that is that Bayer, as an example, I think their laboratory was called Cutler. That specific they had all of this has come out. There have been many lawsuits around this as well, but they were aware that HIV was present in these medications and continued to produce and sell it because it was not cost effective to do the heat treatment for it, and because they had contracts that capped it at a certain amount. And so, in order for them to continue to be able to provide the medication at that contractual rate, in their mind, they thought that they couldn't heat treat it or expend the extra cost on it to heat treat it in order to kill HIV within the medication. And so, actively providing medication that was HIV positive to hemophiliacs. And we saw that when hemophiliacs got involved in the um, fight for governmental assistance, the fight for governmental attention on HIV, that's when we started to see shifts move, because now it wasn't just gay and bisexual men and substance users who were HIV positive or who were dying from AIDS or complications from AIDS. It was now we had children who were HIV positive because of these medications, and in that, um, gay and bisexual men. I keep saying gay and bisexual men, but really I mean men who have sex with men, um, and also substance users were demonized. So the it was the fault of gay and bisexual men, the fault of substance users who were donating their blood in these locations, um, for tainting this blood supply, despite the fact that uh, that companies were aware that this was present. Gay and bisexual men and substance users became the scapegoats for that, and so, and also, side note, when it was regulated in the United States that this medication could no longer be sold without a heat treatment, that Bayer and the Cutler Laboratories just shipped it overseas, and so they distributed it to China, they distributed it to Latin America, to France, um, and so it just kind of kept getting pushed around, and so other hemophiliacs in other countries were also seroconverting and becoming HIV positive because of the bottom line, making sure that they folks didn't want to lose money on the fact that this medication had HIV in it. So, really messed up, really awful the way that these companies handled this information. Um, and also, like, actively, it's one of the reasons why there have been lawsuits globally against this company and other laboratories who have done had similar practices. So, gay and bisexual men and substance users become the scapegoat um, for HIV infection taking place, and panic starts to happen around blood products um, having HIV in the blood supply, in the blood products. And so, because we didn't have a lot of information, we were still figuring out testing. There was a lot of not misinformation, but just really a lot of unknowns that we were trying to figure out, or that as a society trying to figure out. We The result was, like, let's ban gay and bisexual men and folks who have used intravenous drugs, and sex workers from donating to the blood supply, and that became kind of the standard globally. And so, jump forward now 40 years. 40 years? Oh my gosh, how old am I? Yeah, jump forward now 40 years. And you have folks now who we have a lot more information, that there we have a lot more information now around how to test donations. We have a lot more information around the delay periods or the deferral periods for testing, um, when folks are donating blood. But we see that there's still been, like, slow progress to actually change blood bans so that they are more aligned with the current research and more aligned with the realities of our existence as we walk through this life. And I'm also seeing that there's a comment here, so I just wanted to share it with folks. Shakina says, "Hi, Miss Jai. I was someone the blood bank called constantly to donate blood during the early days of AIDS. I didn't donate knowing it was not something I wanted to do." Yeah, so there was also a lot of um, I mean, because of the way that we were being demonized as queer people, there was a lot of reasons why we might not want to donate. And not to put words in your mouth, Shakina, so thank you for sharing that. But I think that there's a lot of reasons why we wouldn't want to donate as well. And as someone who's been on a lifetime, like a permanent deferral list, um, up until recently, because at 18, attempted to donate blood, and was already sexually active with cisgender men. Um, it became really clear to me very quickly how problematic this was, because there was no conversation on what actual risk looks like. There was no conversation on what this could mean for donation, and the assumption was just like you are a risk factor. So when a community is treated as a disease vector, then the stigma becomes that that community carries disease. Um, so where are we now? So in 2015, and I have notes as well because I wanted to make sure that I also wasn't spreading misinformation. So 2015, the blood ban was revised. The FDA revised the blood ban, and it, instead of it being a lifetime ban for anyone who had had any cisgender men who had had any sexual activity with another cisgender man, um, instead of a lifetime ban, it was now 12 months. So it said you could donate blood if you were a gay or bisexual man or a man who had sex with other men. You could donate blood if you hadn't had sex with another man in the last 12 months. So the expectation was that if you wanted to donate blood, then you had to not have sex with other men in the previous 12 months. And the other thing about the guidance is that it's really, sex is very generally defined. So it's also like, have you had sex with other men in the last 12 months? And a lot of us define sex in different ways, right? Is oral sex sex? Is anal sex sex? Is frottage sex? Is jerking each other off sex, right? So it's important for us to be really mindful of the fact that this is still stigmatizing. It's still stigmatizing a specific community, because it's saying this community is still the disease vector, as opposed to the reality, which is that humans can contract HIV, and that the ways that HIV is that seroconversion can happen and that HIV can be contracted is through human activity and specific behavior, specific risks. So that was 2015. In 2020, the most recent change reduced that deferral time down to 3 months. So if you were someone, a man who had sex with men, and um, haven't had a sexual partner in the last 3 months, then you are eligible to donate blood. So again, we're saying that this one community is the community that needs to abstain from sex in order to be eligible to donate blood. So what is proposed now is that instead of focusing on these like identity or these community-based risk factors, so saying, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. One of the challenges with still saying MSM, still saying gay and bisexual men, still saying this community, this identity community, is that we don't do that with any other community as well. And we know that there are other communities that have increased risk for HIV, right? We talk pretty frequently about it in HIV care and prevention circles. We know that POC, especially African American folks in the United States, have really high prevalence, really high rates of new infection of HIV. We know that young people have really high rates and um, really high rates of new infection of HIV. So we know that there are other demographic communities that are disproportionately affected by HIV, just like men who have sex with men. But it is almost unconscionable for us to think that we would say, okay, well, if you are if you're African American, if you're Black, then there will be additional restrictions on your ability to donate blood. If you are between the ages of 13 and 24, well, I guess 18 and 24, there will be additional restrictions to donate blood. So, in effect, we are again singling out one community and saying, oh, because you are part of this community where there is a higher prevalence, you're not going to be able to donate blood, as opposed to looking at the individual risk factors. So now, what are we talking about now? The current proposal is that instead of saying anyone who's a man who's had sex with men, instead of saying anyone who, I think the other language was like women who have had sex with men who are known to have had sex with other men, um, the language now would be if you have had a new sexual partner in the last 3 months, then you're deferred for to be able to donate blood if you had a new sexual partner in the last 3 months and you also had anal sex. Similarly, instead of if you've had multiple partners in the last 3 months and you've had anal sex, then you're deferred for 3 months as well. So they want you to wait and come back they want you to wait and come back and make sure you haven't had either a new sexual partner or multiple sexual partners in the last 3 months and also had anal sex. The other changes are around the use of medications to prevent HIV. So there's language around if you've ever used medication to treat HIV, then you are deferred permanently. I think the assumption there is that someone would be HIV positive if they've used medications to treat HIV, and so folks would be deferred indefinitely or permanently. If you have been on PrEP, if you've been on oral PrEP, so like a pill, then you would be deferred for 3 months. And you'd have to come back and reassess. And if you've still been on PrEP in the last 3 months, then you would have to defer for another 3 months. If you have been on injectable PrEP, which I think there's only one injectable PrEP right now, the Apretude. And so if you've been on injectable PrEP, then you have to defer and wait 2 years from your last injection. So some pieces that um, so those are some of the big pieces that are changing. Some things that I would like to point out. The first is that if we're saying that we're now moving from an understanding of risk as related to this community, and then we're saying, okay, well, if the risk is anal sex, then we'll say if someone's had anal sex in the last 3 months, then they wouldn't qualify, right? If you have a new partner or if you've had multiple partners in the last 3 months and you're having anal sex, then you don't qualify. The challenge with this is that we again are not actually doing individualized risk assessment. We're saying all anal sex is risky, um, which we know is not true, right? So we're not assessing for condom usage. We're not assessing for whether or not someone is the receptive partner or the penetrative partner. We're not assessing for which has different risk associated with it for HIV as well. So we're not actually assessing the behavior in terms of the science of how HIV could actually be contracted. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that there are still a lot of linkages and assumptions that take place that gay and bisexual men are only going to be having anal sex if they're having sex. And so we are still having this issue of this being almost like new, um, and a new acceptable way to talk about the fact that like gay and bisexual or MSM are still being restricted from being able to donate um, because of this 3 month window period. So I think we should be really mindful of what that looks like. The other piece of this is that we are also, when we're talking about PrEP and PEP, so PrEP is taken specifically when someone is HIV negative in order to prevent new HIV infection. So saying to someone, you are currently on PrEP, you're unable to donate blood while you're on PrEP is challenging because if the desire to donate blood is high enough, then the incentive is to stop taking your PrEP, which might be what is preventing a new HIV infection. The other challenge is that this is for folks who are engaged in their sexual health. There are lots of folks who are on PrEP who have been on PrEP for years. Um, and get testing every 3 months as well. And so I think it's important for us to recognize the fact that we might actually be deferring and pushing away a community of folks who are much more aware of their actual HIV status and have confirmed more frequently that they are HIV negative from potentially donating. So I think there are some challenges there. And then the other piece is the 2 year tail for folks who are on injectable PrEP. It was unclear to me when I was looking at it without being a pharmacist, without understanding all the bits and pieces around that, why the tail was so long. My assumption is that there must be some amount of medication that stays in the body for an extended period of time, and also concerned that if someone was to be HIV positive and coming off of that medication, that would potentially delay the um, the window period for an HIV positive test or a reactive test. And so that might be the concern around putting it out for 2 years. But that also then gets to one of these same challenges, which is that if the incentive to donate blood is high enough, then there might be this urgency to discontinue taking a medication that is actually preventing a chronic infection. So it's an opportunity, I think, for us to look differently at the way that we are conceptualizing risk, and recognize that even though we are moving in a beneficial direction and in a direction that is helping to reduce stigma, that there is still stigma present. The other piece is that testing takes place for all blood that is donated. And so there are window periods to HIV tests, and those window periods look different depending on what test is being run. So if you're looking for antibodies to HIV, then generally the window period is anywhere from 1 month to 3 months. If you're looking for antigen to HIV, then you're looking for the window period is like 10 days to 33 days. So it could take up to 33 days in order for a test to come back reactive. If you're looking at, um, there are some that are available in terms of as soon as 16 days after seroconversion takes place. So there are a lot of tests that can be run, and I think one of the challenges is that it's not the what's standardized right now is an antibody test, and because it has that 3-month window period, or maximum of 3-month window period, um, I think that's where the precaution comes in medically. But the other thing that I think is important to point out is that even with antibody testing having that much leeway, even with um, the changes in 2015 and the changes in 2020, in order to uh, let folks who are from our community donate blood, there hasn't been a uh, a blood transfusion there hasn't been a blood transfusion HIV related transmission in that entire time since those changes took place in 2015. So this also feels a little bit like a red herring of like, oh well, if we open it up to MSM, if we open it up to folks who are from our community, then there will be then we will end up getting HIV in our blood supply again. And I think there's a lot of fear, and I think a lot of that fear is because of the harms that we saw in the beginning of the epidemic and the harms that we saw to our communities. But I think that it's important for us to really focus down on who's responsible for that, and really that responsibility lies in the blood centers that are collecting blood donations, that are testing that information. And the reality is that like that the majority of that is being collected, the majority of that is being identified, and that blood is being screened out. You're more likely to get a bacterial infection from a transfusion than you are an HIV infection. So because they're virtually non-existent. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. Um, the other thing that comes up or the other thing that this has me thinking about is that we know that because blood is being tested, that this is also an opportunity for test to treat. We know this is an opportunity to potentially work with communities where HIV is more prevalent, to get folks in for blood donation, but also that if they are HIV positive and they didn't know that before going, or they are out of care, to get folks actively enrolled in care. So this is also an opportunity to work with your HIV prevention and care centers to help shepherd people to the care that they need, um, and may not know that they need. I'm seeing a couple of additional questions. So the first is, I presented two questions to FDA Director Dr. Peter Marks and ONAP Director Dr. Harold Phillips. So the first is, how has U equals U been considered in the development of the draft? Great question. So what I was able to see from the draft is available for comment right now. So I think that's an important thing for us to note, is that because the draft is available for comment, anyone can make public comment on it. So anyone who is living with HIV, detectable or undetectable, in this current draft is permanently deferred from being able to donate blood. So even if you are not able to, because U equals U, means that you are not able to transmit HIV to another person. But the majority of U equals U research focused on sexual transmission. And so we know that for example, for folks who shared injectable equipment, that U equals U was not as strong as it was for folks who were engaging in sexual activity. So I think part of it is that more research needs to take place, which it sucks because it feels very much like a cop out. But I think that more research does need to take place around blood products specifically, and folks who are HIV positive donating blood products, or if HIV is present. But the reality is that because things like plasma, things like blood, those are going to different parts of our body as well, versus like sexual fluids. So I think that that is one of the main concerns, and I don't think a lot of research has taken place around blood products or organ donation or things of that nature. And then the second question is, are we presuming people are engaging in condomless sex? Yes. So that is a great question. So I think when we say that if you've had sex with a new partner in the last 3 months, or you've had multiple partners in the last 3 months, and you've had anal sex, then the assumption is that you are having condomless sex. And so, because the assumption is that you're having condomless sex, then the assumption is that you could potentially be HIV positive and do not know it. So that's one. Two is the assumption that you are having condomless sex and likely having receptive condomless sex, or that the risk is the same. The assumption is that the risk is the same if you are having receptive anal sex or penetrative anal sex, and that's not the case. So I put before you um, some examples, right? So say you are a cis woman who engages in anal sex with your cis male partner. Um, if you are asked, and you this is a new partner, if you're asked if you have a new partner in the last 3 months and have anal sex, then you are deferred for 3 months. Let's say you're the same cis woman and you or has receptive anal sex. Let's say you're the same cis woman and you use a toy to have anal sex and are the penetrative partner with your cis male partner. Those questions would still be answered yes, because you're still engaging in anal sex. So the one, you have to be savvy enough to know what your actual risk for HIV is. Two, the folks who are collecting your blood have to understand what actual risk for HIV looks like as well. Because in that situation, if you are wearing a strap on and penetrating a cis male partner, you are not there's no risk for HIV transmission. So there's still a lot of challenges and a lot of flaws with this. So I think yes, the assumption is that condomless sex is what's taking place, and the assumption is that that condomless sex is taking place and that you are the receptive partner. The other piece of this is that, and I had started to talk about this a little bit at the beginning, but like the other piece of this is that we have when we look at how trans people are categorized in terms of blood donations. So, according to the current 2020 update, your gender identity, your self proclaimed gender identity, is the questionnaire that you fill out for blood donation. So, as someone who's trans feminine, well, I would say trans non binary now, my gender identity is kind of in flux in a lot of ways. But as someone who's trans feminine, trans non binary, I may say I'm a trans woman, I may say I'm trans non-binary, and I start filling out the questionnaire for the femme side of that questionnaire, and there are still a lot of assumptions about my body, about the ways that I might be engaging, and we see this in sexual health assessment all the time. So as we're doing risk assessment, as we're talking about these things, it's important for us to recognize how trans people are still invisibilized a lot of times. I mean, we're legitimately invisibilized in this case because we're told to just answer the questionnaire for the identity that for the identity that we hold, but still expected to select a binary identity. So I think that there are still a lot of challenges in the way that this information is collected, and a lot of challenges in recognizing the diversity of people who are willing and interested in donating blood. Awesome. Thank you for that question. And then there is a comment here that says it's known that condoms break during vaginal and anal sex, putting the blood supply at risk. So condoms can break, absolutely. However, condoms don't always break. And I think the challenge here is that we are making assumptions. We're making a lot of assumptions about the ways that people are engaging, but we're also still continuing to say, like, okay, these folks um, are still vectors for disease. That even if you are taking precautions, even if you are engaging in prophylactics, even if you are engaging in PrEP, even if you are engaging in condom usage, you're still a vector for disease. And so we're going to wait 3 months. Or you're still a vector for disease because you're on PrEP. So because we are having these because we are having this conversation, I think we can be both realistic in how we talk about it. So having a deferral period when we're using testing that has at maximum a 3-month window period does make sense. I think it's important for us to be able to test our blood supply, focusing on the identity, focusing on the individual in a way that stigmatizes the sex that they're having, is challenging when we are talking about collecting blood, when we're talking about blood donations. And it's further challenging when we're seeing these conversations take place in arenas where there's still a lot of misinformation. There are still lots of people who believe that gay and bisexual men should not be able to donate any blood, because of misunderstanding and misconceptions about being HIV positive, about misconceptions around what risk looks like. And the reality is, we're seeing increased HIV risk in heterosexual partners. We're seeing increased HIV risk in communities that have not been traditionally, or historically rather, um, categorized as like the HIV community. So I think it's important for us to keep those pieces in mind. I think also that a there is the reality that, if we focus our energy and our time into increasing the way that testing is taking place, then the blood supply overall becomes safer as well. We also know that for plasma products, if heat treatment is available, that if even if HIV is present in that plasma, it's still treated, and and HIV isn't able to survive through that. So as a very fragile virus, we know that there are also ways to potentially treat the product depending on what the product is. So I generally try not to go over a half an hour in these videos. I think this is a really great topic. I would love to hear other folks' thoughts on the topic of the blood ban, on the topic of the revisions, on the revisions that have happened in the past. I know that there's a lot of inner community conversation right now as well. Some people are really excited and feel like this is an appropriate step. Some people feel like this doesn't go far enough to actually destigmatize MSM and gay and bisexual communities. I'm really interested in the fact that trans and non-binary people can say, uh, are able to self-disclose identity and fill out a form from there. And I wonder how that shifts what risk potentially looks like, or how someone could potentially be screened out or kept in. So if you have comments, if you have thoughts, please leave them in the comments. Also, the request for comments from the FDA is open for another 30 days. So please go to the FDA's website. And if you have any comments, any ideas on ways that this could be phrased better, framed better, considerations to keep in mind. One of the other things I wanted to point out is that, someone who was working in PrEP and PEP for about 7 years, the one of the things I noticed that lots of folks would be on the medication and not really know why they were taking it, not really know that they were on, especially PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. Folks were just like, I'm taking medication to keep myself from getting HIV, or I'm taking medication because I had this exposure, or a needle stick, or a condom broke, or what have you. And I think one of the challenges is that the medication that's used for PEP is similar to regimens used to treat HIV. And so folks who are assessing eligibility for donation should be mindful of not just asking about the medications that are being taken, because I think if we ask like, okay, well, you're not sure what you were on, like what medications have you taken in the past, then we may unintentionally put people on a permanent referral list as well, or deferral list, I mean, saying that, oh, well, this person has taken medications to treat HIV in the past. So I think that that's just something to be mindful and cautious of as well. Let's see. Oh, I have a couple more comments. So okay, the reply comes from the FDA, so that it's known that condoms break during vaginal and anal sex, putting the blood supply at risk. Okay. Which I would also push back and say like that the what puts the blood supply at risk is not testing the blood, and yeah, and not using testing that has shorter window periods. And then seroconcordant couples and polyamorous relationships are unknown if blood donation can be made. The FDA is reviewing this. Yeah, because I think that that is something for us to think about. So if when we talk about, well, so if folks are seroconcordant, then I feel like if folks are seroconcordant, meaning of this having the same HIV status, and we know that folks who are HIV positive are currently permanently deferred, then my assumption would be that if folks are seroconcordant and both HIV negative, then they would be able to donate as couples, because we're talking about two folks. But for polyamorous couples, because since the it's like, okay, well, if you have multiple partners, you can't donate. Then yeah, that doesn't really make sense, especially if you're in a closed poly relationship where there are multiple people, but you're not having sex outside of that relationship. And again, I think it goes back to we really need to move away from uh, scapegoating individuals as the reason that the blood supply could be at risk, and really start focusing on like where are we at in terms of the actual science, and how can we make the advances there, because there are tests for HIV for blood, that could be as short as a 2-week window period. So I think it's important for us to be mindful of what's actually available to us, because a lot of times I think this comes down to the bottom line for the programs that are collecting and distributing blood products. The dilemma is engaging in anal sex for seroconcordant couples. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so right with the if it was a relationship, a seroconcordant couple engaging in anal sex that had been in a relationship for over 3 months, then they would technically qualify. They wouldn't be deferred because it wouldn't be considered a new relationship. However, I know that there are lots of folks who are on again, off again. How long do we define a relationship? It just doesn't. There's lots of pieces to it still that don't really get to all of the nuances of human experience, and so I think that it's important for us to continue to have these conversations. So again, I think it's a great way for us to talk. I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about it a little bit today. Thank you so much for your questions and your comments. I'd love to hear more questions and comments, so please put those in the chat as well. The call to action for today is that because the FDA is accepting feedback right now, please provide feedback on your perspective, especially if you've worked in these fields before. So I really encourage folks. Shakina, you were working in a blood bank at the time, so I really encourage you to provide feedback if you haven't yet. It sounds like you're pretty savvy and on top of it already, so thank you for that. And for other folks who are listening, please provide feedback while that call is open. Again, my name is Miss Jai. I use she, her, and he, him pronouns. I'm a sexual health educator. I am an educator on trans and non binary health and wellness. I'm really excited to be able to bring this to you every week. And I look forward to bringing it out and coming out next week and talking about something new. So, once again, thank you for spending your time with me today. I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you for investing in the health and well being of trans and non binary people. Until next time, have a good one.